This is the Why the Last Man podcast on TV Podcast Industries. We're talking about the third episode of Why the Last Man, Neil.
Yorick. It's Hamlet, right?
Mm-hmm.
Alas, poor Yorick.
Fellow of infinite jest, of most excellent fancy. My dad taught Shakespeare.
They named you after a dead clown.
Welcome back, fellow survivors, to the third episode of Why the Last Man, Neil. I'm one of your hosts, Derek.
Welcome back, fellow survivors. I'm one of your other hosts, John.
And why, once again, must I give this intro? I am Chris.
Welcome back, and hopefully some of our survivors who just stayed with us through all three episodes. We are recording these back to back, exactly the same way as we watched the episodes. So hopefully you've stayed with us through all three episodes. I hope you're enjoying our coverage of Why the Last Man as much as we're enjoying the series overall as well.
Yes. Do you know a Neil? Have you met a Neil? Why is there such a thing as a Neil? Why are they spelling it Neil, N-E-I-L, and not K-N-E-E-L?
Well, it is a person's name. It is the husband of Nora, which took me the whole episode to work out.
Yes.
as to what his name was, because I didn't notice it when he said his name in the first episode. I think is the only time we saw him alive, and he said his name there. But yes, it seemed like a really obscure name for this episode. But they have picked out pieces of dialogue as each of the titles, I think, so far in each of these episodes. Will we get into our discussion about episode 3, guys?
Yes.
Let us do it. So, to kick us off the way we always kick off, Derek, do you want to tell us who gave us what?
Absolutely. This show is based on the comic book series by Brian K. Vaughn and Pia Guerra. Showrunner for the show is Eliza Clark. This episode was written by Katie Edgerton, a writer's assistant on the TV show Halt and Catch Fire. The episode was directed by Daisy von Scherler. She has directed so many TV shows over the year, premium shows like Mad Men and Orange is the New Black, but really interestingly has done 2 big episodes of The Walking Dead quite recently, and has done a couple of episodes of the slightly poorer sister show Fear the Walking Dead. But the reason it's interesting, of course, is post-apocalyptic shows.
Yeah.
Just like Why the Last Man.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting new writer, new director on board. So, yeah, I mean, in terms of the show, I thought this was a really good build of tension within it.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. As I kind of mentioned in the first 2 episodes. First episode, here's your premise. Second episode, establish the show. Third episode, this is what the series is going to be about, is what my feelings on it. We'll talk all about it as we get into the episode. But John, do you want to tell us what they gave us with your synopsis for the third episode of Why the Last Man, Neil?
Sure. President Jennifer Brown is reunited with her son, Yorick Brown, at her base of operations. Yorick is hidden in his mum's apartment, and his presence is kept secret, only known by the President, Agent 355, and the 2 helicopter pilots. A restless Ampersand manages to escape from the bedroom, and Yorick rushes to get him back. Hearing commotion in the corridor from her bed, the sedated and confused former First Lady spots the shadows of Ampersand and Yorick, and follows the noise to investigate. In a cordoned-off part of the building, Agent 355 and Jennifer managed to find Yorick and convince the former First Lady that she was imagining the man who had just a few minutes ago stood before her. As the secret of Yorick gets harder to hide and the challenges mount for President Brown, new challenges threaten her team, with the discovery in Israel of the only female member of the previous administration, Regina Oliver, a fanatical fringe politician. The presence of Yorick only becomes a further liability to her position, as the dead president's daughter Kimberly questions the legitimacy of her presidency and begins to circle Jennifer's secret. Agent 355 pitches a plan to get Yorick away to safety and to protect the president, involving an undercover escape along with the 2 pilots. 2 helicopters lift off on a course to Boston to rendezvous with the geneticist Dr. Mann. But early in the flight, Yorick and Agent 355 witness technical difficulties on the other helicopter as it, along with 2 pilots, crashes to Earth and explodes.
I think technical difficulties needs to be in quotation marks there.
I think so. Yes, it is definitely a air quote technical difficulties in this one. Certainly, judging by the sort of shifty eyes of Agent 355.
Absolutely. It's like, we need to get out of here. We need to escape. We need to take the last man alive and as his male monkey along with us. I'll put them on my helicopter and you just travel ahead in front of us. Yeah, we'll just keep going. We don't need to report this, Yorick.
It's kind of interesting because I was convinced that Agent 355 was probably just going to whip out a gun and put 2 bullets in their head in the room that they were all 3 of them were being held in after they brought Yorick back. So
much easier to explain though, a helicopter crash. Right?
Well, that is true. And there's no gun noise and, it does show, strategic restraint on the part of Agent 355, for sure. Absolutely. But I think she got a little bit too nervous, because, in this, one of the helicopter pilots certainly, but both of them, I guess reflect personally these two, the idea of increasing conspiracy and questioning around, just what's happened, why it's happened, and certainly now with just the president's son being brought back, and therein that secret lies the danger for Jennifer Brown.
Absolutely. I love them connecting the dots and going, every man on earth is dead except for you, and now you're the president of the United States and your son is alive. I love them just connecting those conspiracy dots. I think that's a really fun moment. But as you say, a really scary moment for 355 as she kind of going, uh-oh, this stuff is building up. If we don't get him out of here, things are going to go bad for us.
Oh, like it did in Russia.
Exactly, yes. Announcement to the Russian people that all the Russian men in parliament were alive didn't end well for that Russian parliament, apparently.
No, it
all
didn't.
contact lost with Russia. And this is the kind of stuff that I'm really enjoying about this episode, particularly is the expansion of this. We've got multiple countries now. We've got an idea of what else is going on in the world. It's not just US-centric. There's other things going on in Israel. The mention of Russia and what's going on in the US. Let's get into our big moments from the episode, talk about the big things that we were interested in from the episode. John, do you want to start this week?
Yeah. I have got, I'm titling it Suspicion and Stirring. But primarily, that ending were Kimberly, the daughter of the now dead president, and Jennifer Brown are stood in front of the wall of the fallen with all the, the photos that could be cobbled together from the new administration in this compound. I just thought this was fantastic. I think the music underneath it was really good. Just that edginess to it. I think it reflected the threat that is coming from multiple angles on Jennifer Brown as the president, and just the building of the tension from those threats, but being reflected in the president's compound here, that is also happening outside in the wider world, but also like we saw in the holding room with the 2 pilots. And I thought this just really, it's kind of like I said about it in the synopsis, that Jennifer's circling her secret. It felt predatory from her, because there was that moment where it was, that conversation about loss of sons, husbands, fathers, about, that grief that is so fresh for all these people, but at the same time, you then it just goes on this journey where she says, are we able to quantify loss? Have people lost more than others? And in the sense that she's lost 4 of her family, 3 sons and a husband, but also then her father.
Absolutely.
And saying, I feel as though I have. And again, implicit in that is just, because of what her mother, has relayed to her, in terms of that moment, in the compound where, her mum is stood face to face with Yorick in this sort of off limits, cordoned off part of the building. And she just, she finishes, just with that, a fantastic line. She goes, my mother conjured your son, Yorick, wandering these halls. This idea
How
that
unlikely that would be.
How unlikely it would be, exactly. And it's just the perceived threat from her.
Oh, yeah.
And certainly because it builds on seeing Kim effectively recruiting people, to her as a person, in opposition to Jennifer, with the knowledge that Regina Oliver, the nutcase fascist fringe politician, who was only brought in for that vote block, happens to be the only female in the former administration and is alive. And, she has that great, thing as well, once she's told the news of what's happened, that if true, then I'm the president of the United States of America. And you're like, okay, you went straight there. And
it's the first thing she says.
Yeah, exactly.
As she wakes up. But I do love that it's said with this raspy voice of a woman who hasn't drank any water for these 2 or 3 months now, isn't it? Since the.
But she knows what she wants and she's going to get it. I just as an aside, I really like the fact that then the people in the current administration doing, their day to day is like, not a chance in hell. We cannot have this person, as president of the USA. Effectively they give her the thumbs down.
Yeah, I love they're even going, even when we get her up to speed, she won't be able to do this job and it'll take her months to get up to speed and we need to do things right now, keep going the way we're going. But, this is really interesting, and this is a really good treatment of a very minor storyline in the comic books. I'm sure you guys remember this from reading the comics, this idea of, President Brown, ascending to the presidency and all the wives of the senators who have watched their husbands die and lose their seats feel that it is their right to take back over those seats that their husbands left behind is the storyline. But I love how it's fleshed out here, where you have the other side of it. You had somebody else who should actually be president and nobody wants them to be. So the side that supports Jennifer going, well, there's no way she's going to be president under our watch. And the side that is against Jennifer going, well, we want to have the power that our husbands had because we were the ones that were effectively controlling their lives anyway. So we belong in those seats, even though we didn't get the votes. So I love this kind of political machinations that are going on.
Absolutely. And I think, it all comes down to this very intimate moment between Kimberly and Jennifer. But the threat there is real from her. It is almost a warning shot across the bow, but it's one that is still not fully formed because she doesn't know whether her mum, it's the story, but she knows her mum is going through issues. She knows she's kind of slightly losing the plot, and so it's just letting Jennifer know that she knows what her mum has told her.
Absolutely.
And I mean, Diane Lane is just the look is phenomenal. There's that edginess between the two of them, and ultimately, the silence of Diane Lane here as the president is just really good. And again, they're holding hands. It's this optics of it for Kimberly, but the reality is, that she is a power person here. She's making power plays. And I thought this was really, really good. I thought this absolutely bookended this episode so well. And I really enjoyed it. For sure.
Yeah, agreed. I actually wanted to jump on this one because for me, for any of our listeners who haven't read the comic books, Kimberly is a new character for the show. I always get somewhat trepidatious, because it's when you are adding something. I always want to make sure they're just not adding it for the sake of adding it.
Mm-hmm.
They're adding it for an explicit purpose. And within this episode 2 and this episode, you really start to understand why they have added the character of Kimberly.
Absolutely.
As this proxy for the more conservative valued based, but it was her father who taught her and ran the country, and she spoke her advice and counsel was always taken. And we see the cancel culture references. We see the mum boys references, like men are no longer men. So we see that very much being modernized into today's kind of cultural touch points and references.
Yeah.
But like just that scene, John, you're right.
Yeah.
The fact that they're holding, it's as if they're having a battle.
Yeah.
But you can imagine that on a pulpit stage where the two of them are there smiling and waving while having this war between them. Because Kimberly is now essentially saying, I know something is 100% up. You are starting to freeze me out. I am aware, and I will not go quiet into the night.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. It was so good. And I think as well, the other part of this, the stirring element, and it's to your point, it's that other side. This is, I guess, Kimberly is this idea of power. And yes, Jennifer has power. And I guess, to quote a Spider-Man reference to some extent, it's what you do with that. There's responsibility with that. And it's you get the sense from Kimberly, it's personal gratification on the basis of her privilege, previously, but also, I guess, on the perceived idea of where she finds herself now, rudderless and powerless because there are no men. It goes to her, her Boys Without Mum book, and that at the start about, boys need to be boys. That's how she has, that's the relationship with her life. It is being close to powerful men, and I just thought it was just really, really good. And then on the flip side, it's where you see, that they need, the administration needs this power station up and running because tunnels are going to flood. People want electricity. The world is going to chaos out there. And, the engineer that can, like, fix the power plant, doesn't want to do it because she's like exhausted in terms of emotionally. She can't face it. She's lost people herself. And I just thought, it contrasted with that other element of using the power to help other people. We saw that at the start, the beginnings of this, in a sense, with Jennifer saying to Kimberly, we're just trying to do stuff to survive the present. I just thought that this speech to the engineer, Mrs. Jacobs, was just really good. It felt like a rallying cry to the people around the table in her administration, to this woman, the engineer who ultimately understands and commits herself to helping the administration, and to try and fix this power plant. And I just thought it was, that really interesting sort of kind of opposite or other power dynamic. And I guess ultimately, the more socialist or left wing side of the current political polarization, I guess, that you're seeing potentially in America. So that touch point as well. And I thought this was just great contrast with seeing Kimberly trying to round up people for her own power base, rather than through her actions. It was about who she was, not about how you're trying to deal with the situation.
Exactly.
And I thought this was a really sort of great moment. I thought both of them were phenomenal in that scene, and I think Diane Lane was just absolutely awesome in this, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're totally right. I love how the scene plays out, that it's about the struggle for power. It's not about what's best for the world. It's that Kimberly's lost everything and all the power that she used to have by having the ear of the president, effectively. She's struggling to get back up there, even though there's so much great progress in what needs to be done to help people that are dying, people that will die, if all these things won't be fixed. And that's what Jennifer's focused on. It plays out really well on the scene.
Yes, 100%.
And I don't think it's the end of it. I think there's lots more of that to come in the show, and I'm glad they're expanding that storyline, because it did feel like a few pages in the comic book that led into a bigger standoff between the two factions, I suppose we'll say. But it's great that they're expanding that, because it's really important. There's lots that needs to go on in Washington and the center of government for the US. So I'm glad they're expanding that storyline.
Agreed. And I'm very interested to see episode 4 when we see more from Regina Oliver, the Marjorie Taylor Greene proxy, which is definitely going to be an interesting piece. As an outsider from a non-US citizen, this is definitely one that I will be watching with great gusto.
Absolutely, because I do feel, just quickly, I feel Kimberly probably would agree with Yorick, where he says, my mum won the apocalypse, which is a great line. I guess that's how she's seeing it, as winners and losers, not as, well,
survivors. We're
all in the same situation, and we actually have to try and get back to some kind of normalcy, because, I think that's a great line from Yorick.
It really is. It really is. That's a great point, John. What about yourself, Chris? What's your point for the episode?
So very, very interestingly, my point is Yorick and more Ampersand. The night walk. My God, he needs to get a leash on that monkey.
Yes.
Like, just even a baby harness leash. One of those ones that just go over its shoulders and stop kids walking into traffic. Just get that for your monkey, Yorick. Come on.
Yeah, it's a highly trained animal as well. It seems to be able to open doors and everything. So,
but does not come back when called.
Yeah. It might have been okay when it was in his apartment. He could just hold up a treat and call him back, but we've seen it a few times now that Ampersand will just walk away whenever he's left alone and whenever he's curious, basically. Yeah.
Curious George proved how curious monkeys can be. So I found this very exacerbating, because it is the second week in a row where, based on Ampersand, we see Yorick get into kerfuffles. And it was, I suppose it is a returning and a continuing theme throughout the comic books.
Yeah, I was about to say, Chris is jumping off on episode 4, because it's probably going to happen quite a few times again.
Yeah, exactly. No. So, it's just more, you need to understand that. And it was basically through, actually, we talked about this off air. It's through that reminder and the understanding that once you accept that, yes, this will happen quite a lot, because Ampersand is the catalyst for a lot of these events, be it, and it always just essentially, the writers used Ampersand essentially as that plot point. It's like, and we add a curious monkey and everything goes to hell. Yay!
Yeah.
It was just always that way to move the story forward. And that's what it does. And I needed to remember that, because I found it difficult, because it is that you're like, he's been told to stay in there, don't do anything silly. And then he goes wandering around the Pentagon, and you're like, oh, come on. And that kind of then leads into Yorick as a character. So I had initially spoken to Derek, we were chatting off air about this. It was always this, I found this so strange, because it's been about 6 years since I've kind of did my last run through of Why the Last Man, probably. And the character I have in my head, which is probably the character by the end of the series, is very different from the character at the beginning of this season, of this series, because there is a whole, well, there's nostalgia, my own personal nostalgia, there, and the rose-colored glasses I have on it, but also there is that it is the character at the end of a journey. So it's Bilbo Baggins and Frodo are very different characters by the end of The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit than they are at the very beginning.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but if you were to watch the very first Lord of the Rings and think about how Frodo was acting at the beginning versus the end, there is this juxtaposition that is just very jarring.
Yeah.
And I had that initially. I was like, why is this character? He's when he's being told that he has to help try and save the world, he's kind of being, and all he wants to do, and he calls it out. He goes, I want to be selfish. Just let me be. Let me go find my fiance, which technically she's not, but we'll get to that later. That whole aspect, and you're like, this character is, why is he the last man?
Absolutely.
And that is the fun. So it's getting through that. And I talked to you about it. I've talked to my wife about it. And it is the why, beyond him being Yorick and a tragic hero, beyond him being the last man and his journey there, beyond him, why is he the last man? Like, how does he survive this? Like, because he technically shouldn't. We've had twice now in the course of 2 episodes, where actually 3 technically across each episode, he has nearly been taken out. Once by a helicopter, once by the laundrette, and once by essentially walking around the Pentagon. By the way, the security of the Pentagon's pretty shit at the moment. I'm just going to put that out there.
Hardly any of the security team are there, Chris.
Absolutely.
Remember, it's a very small security force, and there was at least one person patrolling the hallways. But that's kind of the other thing I was going to say to you, Chris, as well. It's not just why is Yorick the last man on Earth, it's also why is Ampersand. So
yes.
Ampersand's also another living male mammal on the planet, effectively. So that's part of it as well. I remember kind of building up my mind over the years of reading the comic books and all the trouble that Ampersand is getting Yorick into, and I kept going, does Ampersand understand what he's doing? Is he a much more intelligent monkey, or is there something about his brain that is making him do the things he's doing, and that's the reason why he survived? Because that is a little bit of the storyline that we're going to be following over the season, right? Is why are these 2 people the last survivors? And I think in terms of the development of Yorick, what this does lead Yorick to is, you've already mentioned the Wall of the Fallen, but Yorick's moment at the Wall of the Fallen when he's going past, trying to find Ampersand, when he is confronted with a wall of much more superior human beings that should have survived when he did, is I think a really emotional moment for the character. And I think that does play into the development of who he will become, when he embraces himself, I suppose, as that character. And I think it's really interesting. You know, there are fallen war heroes effectively there, and this kid who is an escapologist, and that's kind of all he's added up to all his whole life. So he's questioning himself as to why he's there.
And he's not even that good of an escapologist. That's the fun part. So far they have not shown that, which is the fun part, because so far they've shown him struggling with the escape. Mm-hmm. It was this journey of discovery of Yorick, if we will, a rediscovery of this character. Mm-hmm. And then we get to his escape. And again, like we've very quickly discussed the helicopter ride, but just that, him having to get in with the dead bodies, that was just like the first jump of him coming out, going, no. It's just, yes, of course you would. Yeah. And then the explosion. And it's one of the reasons I'm really enjoying Ben Schnetzer as Yorick, because he's able to portray that confused Yorick face that we saw in the drawn so well, which was as they fly to Boston, Massachusetts. You see, and the lead helicopter spins out and explodes. He's like, "Oh, why? What's happening? Oh, okay." Just this lost boy in him, and he's just like, "Yeah, okay, fine, just whatever." It was just so interesting.
Yeah, I think that's the other great thing about it, about Yorick in this episode is you say lost boy. This is kind of the first time we've got close quarters of Yorick and Agent 355 as well.
Oh, yeah.
And their relationship. And I always saw this as like mother and a child. And you have some really great moments, because you have on the one hand, Agent 355, understanding the clear and present danger that he poses to his mum and her boss, effectively, as the president, and sees that right from the start with the two pilots. And then, after spending the time in the bedroom with him, is like, we need to move your son. But, her the two elements of 355, I loved her interaction with Yorick, where she says, well, why did they name you after a dead clown from Shakespeare? All these different things. Yeah. The sort of knowing look as he's throwing up the spaghetti down the loo because he's stuffed his face for the first time in ages with a decent meal.
I did tell him.
Exactly. All this good stuff really from her. But at the same time, I just absolutely loved her reasoning, setting out her reasoning why they need to go to Dr. Alison Mann as the geneticist picked by her, because she was top of her field, but she took a bit of dodgy research money, and so effectively it froze her out of sort of the wider scientific community. Yeah. But before then, she was top of her field, so she's below the radar, and I just loved the 355's reasoning as she's spelling out why effectively they're going to a discredited, disgraced former researcher, and not to someone who was considered to be a creditable researcher at the top of their field, because it's quieter, though less attention, and
take politics out of the decision. The decision making should be based on the person that's top of their field,
exactly.
Not those political things that disqualify her.
It was just really good, and to build the pilots into that plan as well. And I think just coming back to Yorick, again, other really interesting character sort of just point is where, he says, I just want to find Beth. I know I should be going to the geneticist. I know, I need to be studied. I know what I should say, he goes, but I want Beth. I want the dinosaur in my playbox, and that's the only thing. Yes, I should be doing the dusting or the hoovering or the house chores that Mum has assigned, but actually I just want the dinosaur to play with. And I just thought it was really, I loved this interaction, between Yorick and 355 with the helicopter ride, and the slightly surreal moment on the night walk with him and the former First Lady.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really good, really good.
I will quickly add that one of the better scenes is the explanation of why he is called Yorick, because there will be people asking Yorick and Hero why. So it is a good quick piece because his dad was an English major.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Really good. And my favorite scene about Yorick from the episode is after seeing the Wall of the Fallen and approaching his mom and saying to her, "Why is it me? Why is it me? Why couldn't it be any of the other men that are on the Wall of the Fallen, and any of those other men that are more qualified to be in this position?" She says, "Well, it's not them. It's you, and you can do it." And then sends him off. The goodbye to Jennifer Brown from Yorick. And, I mentioned last episode how quickly that came up, that he's been there, and now poof, one episode later, he's gone off in a helicopter and he's off to Boston on the next adventure. So they've only been together for one episode.
Yeah.
And off he goes.
Quick question before we get it, because I'm going to move on to Derek, because I want to hear your main point for this episode. Mm-hmm. So we should point out that you are a massive Walking Dead fan.
Yes, I am.
Both comic books and TV shows. And one of the key aspects, if I assume, is that we don't know why the zombie apocalypse happened in Walking Dead.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. In the comic books of Y the Last Man, we get we do get something. We get somewhat explanation for Yorick and Ampersand and what happened.
Yeah.
Do you think, and again, we're just talking pure speculation here, do you think they will play with that? Do you think that they will start to give us earlier tidbits throughout, like at the beginning or the end of season 1, to try and help set them up for season 2? Or is it very much going to be a Walking Dead, which is, no, look, we'll get to why Yorick is there at some point. We're never going to talk about why the apocalypse happened, because it has just happened. It is more just, we'll give you an explanation of why Yorick is alive, but we're not going to talk about the larger why it happened. We're just here in the future.
I think what's most interesting about Why the Last Man, the comic book, is that those things are explained in the 60-issue comic book. There are reasons there, and some of them are a little bit more obscure than others. Some headlines, I presume, are already out there on comicbook.com as to why is Yorick still alive and why Ampersand is still alive. I'm sure they've given the one-line explanation that I could say right here, but I don't want to ruin it in case they go with the same explanation. But there is a much deeper explanation as to why everything has happened. There is a much more complex explanation that isn't able to be summed up in a paragraph, that has to be told over multiple season storylines to get you to the point of understanding what's going on in this world from built by Brian K. Vaughn and Pia Guerra. So I really hope they give an explanation. I don't think it's going to be the same explanation as the comic book. There's multiple ways they can go to give a similar feeling as to why these things have happened. But I think because of the nature of how this world works, where people go, I don't care about spoilers, I want to know what happened, and read the synopsis on Wikipedia of what happened in the comic books. Because of this world, I think they'll play with it. And I think they'll do a different version of the storyline. And I think it's quite easy to come up with something similar, but in the same style.
Yeah, that's why I get the feeling, based on even just 355 being in the room at the beginning, I get the feeling that there is they will start to play and tweak, temporize it, because of exactly everything you said. But I think they'll start to sprinkle some of that story in towards the end of a season 1, to kind of set the groundwork for season 2, 3, 4, wherever, how far. If you think it's 60 issues, 10 issues a season, maybe that could be the way they do it, or it could be 20 and just play. Yeah,
let's hope. I'm really hoping that because it is based on a comic book story that is finished, I'm hoping that we also get a TV show that finishes and gets to its end as well. However many seasons they require to do that. I will mention, I think I mentioned it back in episode 2 or episode 1, this idea that Regina Oliver, the actual president of the US, the now president of the US, it was called out that she was in Israel. And in this episode, we find her in Israel. So that's a pretty big change from the comic book. There was no initial connection with Israel at the start of the comic books. It becomes more important as the comics move on. The people that are there coming to America. But it's really interesting that they've put the actual president of the US sitting in America. That makes them even more important to this storyline, doesn't it? Israel now.
Definitely.
So I thought that was quite interesting. So I said, watch out for it. We did. We saw that. So that's quite cool.
There you go.
And it also gives you some kind of scope for the show as well. If they're doing these dropped lines, which they did in the first episode, this, you had to read the subtitles to hear, we've heard a threat from Israel, in the subtitles, which happen just before the president drops in episode 1. If they're feeding that in background noise in the first episode, it does give you an impression that there will be a big development as the show goes on. There are things that are going to be in the background at the moment, or characters that are in the background at the moment that will become bigger and bigger as the show moves on as well. So I like that. I like that that it will build that way as well. So maybe the second time you see it, you might pick up some other stuff, for the future episodes.
That would be good.
Yeah.
But speaking of future episodes, let's get back to this one. Derek, do you want to tell us what your major point is for this episode?
I was going to say, speaking of characters that are coming into the TV show and may come into their own in a different way in the future, my major point from this episode is Nora Brady and her daughter and their experience. We kind of sort of mentioned it last episode about Nora, who was a former person in power, going to her former place of work, a place that she had all the power to walk directly to the president's office, and now couldn't even get past the gate, or couldn't even get to sit down with anybody on the inside. We're seeing her story play out really interestingly, I think, where she now goes back to the place that she's been staying with the local mothers in the area who have their kids with them as well, or their daughters with them as well. And she's effectively turfed out by that group because she's no longer of any use to them at all. They've chosen that there's only space for 6 people in the car. So taking 3 mothers and 3 daughters, that leaves her, Nora, and her daughter on the outs because she's useless in the outside world. All she knows how to do is twist and spin PR for the president. That is now a task that's not useful in the outside world when you're looking for food to feed everybody around. The reason why I like this probably is because it does feel like a storyline that's been in a lot of survival movies and a lot of post-apocalyptic movies, storylines of how these people will survive. And I just like that we're focusing on this character that had massive power and now has nothing. And how the heck is she going to survive? She has no usable skills. We even see a great moment where she goes back to her former home. I love the emotionality that Karen Ireland brings to this role. I think she's really, really good in it. There's moments and scenes and moments that they linger on her feelings about what's going on. The idea that she sees a teenage mutant ninja turtle hand on the floor and has to reunite it with the other part of the toy. She has to connect it back to the ninja turtle because this is something belonging to her son that has died. You know, you can see all that in her face in this really quiet moment when she's at home. And then she has to go and try and bury her husband and son in the garden. Unlike what we've always seen in movies and TV shows where they have to bury their dead relatives after the apocalypse, it's really difficult to dig 6-foot holes in your back garden. Have you ever tried to plant a rose bush in your back garden and dig, a foot into the garden? It's really difficult. Digging 6 feet into your back garden for 2 graves. And you can see, that it's coming into winter. It's the ground is really frosty and you can see how much she's struggling. She gets, maybe 6 or 7 inches dug in the garden. And of course, the vultures and the crows are all out because of the rotting bodies of her husband and son. I just think this entire scene plays out like a great short film. The emotionality of the scene, how it's directed, how it's scored, I think is really, really good. And I think you need scenes like this early on in the season for a brand new character like Nora Brady, because I think she's going to become very important when she either goes on the path of getting that power back that she had in the past. So we have a little bit of that story with Kimberly going on. Kimberly, who didn't really have any actual power. And Nora, who did have real power because she had the ear of the president. And Nora, who did have real power because she was effectively controlling everything the president did and how he was perceived by the world. Will she go that path? Will she join up with Kimberly and the other former wives of the Republicans? Or will she discover that she has abilities she's never tapped into before? Will she become the protective mother of her daughter to keep her daughter alive? I think we will have to watch Nora in the future because I think she's going to be a really interesting character as the show progresses. I
mean, I think that's the great thing about this character. I mean, firstly, it is just that harsh side of the fact that, in a sense, she feels that she's been abandoned by her peers in the sense of being turned away last week, but also now abandoned by the group of women who she's housed with. I guess they were just looking about what they could get from her. They don't see any use that she can bring. And so, effectively abandon her. And so it's really harsh. But she's still got a living daughter. Yeah. And it's the tension building up with these experiences that she, is involved with. But her daughter seriously injures herself. And, her first thought is, how did you get a tetanus jab? Yeah. When you went to summer camp last year? Because, there's a real danger she could lose the one, other surviving member of her family. And, you can see that she's frantic about it. And ultimately, all these experiences are going to feed into, I guess, how she reignites her power at some point. I'm guessing at this stage, and
unfortunately, even though we've watched the 3 episodes back to back, we haven't seen any more episodes, so we're definitely not going to spoil anything because we don't know what happens with the character.
And ultimately at this stage, it's. We're just leaving. So they leave their house and, you have that little brief moment where the radio comes on and it's like a bit of normalcy. Yeah. but the tank's like less than a quarter full. How far are they going to get? What's going to happen? Because, you know, the interesting thing is we hear where Yorick is going in Boston, that is almost a bit out of control, a bit more, it's gone a bit frontier, like really.
Yeah.
And so, you know, what's she going to find out? She's on the road, with less than a quarter of a tank. So does she have an aim, or is it just, I need to get out of the house? So I thought this was really nicely done, to be honest.
Yeah, or help her daughter, of course, just trying to get her daughter to somewhere.
Yes,
safe.
exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I personally, so far, and I think it's, again, through our discussions, I learned to appreciate more of it. On initial viewing, I had problems with this storyline.
Okay.
It's just because I've yet to connect with this character.
Mm-hmm.
Could be because it kind of hits too close to home as a person in comms who has spent years spinning, kind of knowing that in an apocalypse I may be useless.
Yeah. Don't worry, a lot of us feel like that, Chris.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like, oh, cool, that's me. But I at least can maybe dig a hole. I did that for my tree recently, and that was a good few feet down. So yeah,
excellent.
That's fine.
If you need bodies buried, call Chris, apparently.
Yes, exactly. I will not tell people where they are buried.
Oh,
I'll just dig the hole. Anyway, when you discuss that, there is that possibility for this character. Is she going to go down the Kimberly route? Because that does make sense. That is an understandable route for this character to become the PR machine for Kimberly and this new potential line of succession, kind of this other president. Or do you go the opposite? Does she become the mama bear? And that's an interesting route. That's an interesting story where you have this woman who theoretically is pushed to the brink and the edge and goes beyond.
Yeah.
So she then becomes, feral is the wrong word, but like Mad Max Furiosa style, where she shaves her head and attacks and comes out with big machetes, and she becomes that.
She gets new skills on toast, effectively.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. And you know, you mentioned Walking Dead. You know, that is something that they're dealing with their characters all the time. What if the world that we live in doesn't exist anymore? Who do you become, effectively? So it's something that we've seen multiple times before, and I just wonder if you will need to have at least one character going to there, right? You'll need to have a few characters who change everything completely, because the world that we knew in the past isn't there anymore, right? So it'll be really interesting how they deal with it. I just think Nora is really prime place to have that characterization. She was right there at the start. She was the protective mother at home, making sure her son got the perfect bouncy castle, while dealing with the president's PR problems, balancing it all with a great husband who was also helping out. And now what happens when all that falls apart for her? So I think that's a great storyline to explore in the show.
Yeah. I just hope I start to connect with it more. I think that's my problem. I just have a disconnect at this point, but episode 4 can change that. It's
going to be one of those ones, season 4, season 5 of this show, and you'll be going, Nora, the best central character of this show. There you go.
Outside of Ampersand.
And played by Marin Ireland, we didn't mention before, but Marin Ireland was played Sissy in Umbrella Academy, which we covered last year, season 2 of Umbrella Academy, and one of the best storylines of the show as well. Really enjoyed her in that show. So great to see her back on TV podcast industry, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
Gentlemen, with that, I think we're end of our points. So we'll move on to some notes, if you have any.
Just one for me. I just really liked the one of the pieces of the conversation between Yorick and Jennifer, where he says to her again in frustration that he's the last man alive, says to Jennifer, surely you found another man. And her response to him is, we found loads of other men, but none with the Y chromosome.
Yes.
Which is a really good handling of a slight criticism, well, a serious criticism that Y the Last Man seems to have found itself in over the last 20 years. I did mention first episode that I've read them quite recently, and there are some things that do need to change, certainly about the writing, because of how life has progressed and the experience of the writers themselves and the experience of everybody, really. But I would never actually level the book as being a transphobic book, and I'd never level it at the writers as writing things in that are transphobic. But what they do what tends to happen in the book is Yorick finds himself in situations with really bad people with really shitty opinions, basically. And that tends to come across. Those characters tend to be the ones that say really crappy things that wouldn't be there otherwise. But I like that the show is dealing with this the right way. I like that the show has got a trans character in Sam who's with Hero at the moment. We didn't see them this episode. We'll hopefully see them again next episode. But I like that they have those storylines, and I like this being dealt with as part of society the way it should be, in the storyline. I think Brian K. Vaughan was so focused on Yorick and his storyline that he didn't really look at what the wider world, experience was, and tended to look at it through the eyes of pretty dark and evil people a lot of the time. So I don't know. I like that it's being handled this way on the show, and wanted to call it out here in the third episode.
Yeah, no, I think so too. And I don't think you can, for me personally, I don't feel you can level a criticism at the comics. And it was actually dealing with a particular situation, at a particular time of when it was written as well. I mean, if it's not something specifically about identity politics, but a lot of things will always touch on that. And, this book was touching certainly in terms of just simply women's rights. And I don't think it's transphobic because of that. I think, it's being brought up to date, ultimately,
exactly.
With this adaptation of it, from the comics. And it's like we've always said around the Marvel, TV shows and movies that we see. And, I'm incredibly supportive of TV changing the comics as much as them taking the comics and using them. A lot of the time in comic adaptations, it is, and it can be in others like Lord of the Rings, it's a fanatical zeal for purity around the source material. Dare I say it? That's probably landed me in a lot of trouble. But I think, these things grow. It's the same way that effectively Shakespeare didn't grow. I mean, he had women on stage playing men's parts, and men on the stage playing women's parts back in Elizabethan England. And then I guess the purity of Victorian, at least high society, or the outward looking of it, was that, a man is a man and a woman is a woman. And now it's coming back to where you have these interchangeable roles and actors with different genders. And so I think our literature is evolving. I think this is where, with the showrunner, the writers, the inputs, they're taking that source material and they're adapting it and adding to it, and feeding back into something that was written, at this stage 20 years ago, and developing and saying, there's also this element, because as well, there's, yeah, you're right. It's a focus on Yorick in particular, with, but with the wider situation happening in the society. And
it's where Yorick interacts with that, is how the comic book tended to handle it. And one of the things I'll absolutely praise the show for is that it does feel like an ensemble piece. I think I kind of mentioned that last episode as well. It feels like it's an ensemble show with a bunch of really interesting stories going on. I think that's kind of the element of it that I'm really enjoying so far, these 3 episodes.
I think, look, we faced something somewhat similar recently with Invincible, where we saw Robert Kirkman, who also did Walking Dead, who had these older comic books and is updating them for TV. In the case of Invincible, he was updating for animation. But even he said, looking back on it, time does help, because you are able to add these new lenses. And yes, like, this is the great thing. They're adapting it for the modern audience of modern time. Same way if we look at Baz Luhrmann's adapted Romeo and Juliet in the 90s, it was a good adaptation for that time. Yeah. But that's all I wanted to say.
And we do still love Claire Danes, and we do love Leonardo DiCaprio. They're still great. They're still great.
I did have one note, and it's more of a question. Where's Beth?
Australia.
She's
she's still at the airport.
Yeah, she's still at LAX. Or no, she wasn't in LAX. She was in JFK.
There you go.
She went to LaGuardia when she should have gone to JFK.
Or maybe LaGuardia got a flight out. You never know. You never know. We actually don't know the difference between the time when they had their argument. She stormed out of Yorick's apartment after his ridiculous proposal to her, and when he wakes up the following day. We know there's obviously a few hours, so maybe she did get out of America, but she probably wouldn't have been able to make the flight all the way to Australia. But yes, where's Beth? I think is the question that Yorick's asking every day now.
Yeah.
But with that question, that will bring us into episode 4. Gentlemen, what did you think of episode 3? John, take it away.
I really enjoyed this. I thought that it was really tense within that compound, and I loved all that, the relationships there with Kimberly, with finding fanatical Regina in Israel, and what that brought to the trials and tribulations. I loved, as well, I thought Diane Lane was absolutely superb in this episode. Mm-hmm. I love the interaction of Yorick with Agent 355. Again, I think Ashley Romans here is just so well cast in this role. I'm loving her playing this character. Mm-hmm. The crazy first lady and her imaginings and how that fed into Kimberly, the explosive helicopter with the wink, wink, nudge, nudge, I guess, ultimately. Yeah. It almost felt like breaking the fourth wall as, Ashley Romans is looking, back to Yorick, but it looks like she's slightly looking at camera with her eyes. I'd say, I did that.
It was 355 all along.
Yeah, so it was really, really good. I would give this 4 22 dead pilots out of 5. And yeah, really, really enjoyed it. That is also a reference to 21 Pilots, the music group. This is in homage to the 2 pilots that were given a medal and then were blown up, basically.
Yeah, that was a bit of a shame, unfortunately. How about you, Chris? What do you think overall this episode?
Yeah, this is really kind of starting to bring me back in. After my initial kind of, not hesitation, but the feeling of a slow burn in episode 2, this kind of ramped up the storyline again, gave some aspects that I really enjoyed, some that I'm kind of, initially was kind of less happy with, such as the Nora storyline. Through our discussions, I'm kind of coming around to it. But overall, really enjoyed it. Looking forward to episode 4, and looking to see where we end up at the end of season 1. What about yourself, Derek?
Loved this episode. Loved the addition to all the storylines that are going on, the new characters and the storylines that they're getting are really good. But the fact that we have a scene with, I would think, our 2 major characters of the comic book, 355 and Yorick, around the table. And it, of course, ending with him puking in a toilet because he's eaten too much. All that stuff feels like this is right out of the comic book. This is great fun. And we now have our mission. We've finally got to a point where 355 is taking Yorick off to meet Dr. Mann, who I'm really excited to see, hopefully next week. Really excited to see Dr. Mann, and they have their mission. They're away from the capital. That storyline, I'm sure, will continue to play out much more than it did in the comic book. We now have those central characters in the White House, in government, which hopefully we'll see more of than we did in the comic book. And that will be now running as a side by side story to what's going on with 355 and Yorick. So I'm really excited by what this show has set up. And now we're going into the real series now, I suppose, after these 3 episodes. 1 episode once a week from now on. And I'm really looking forward to it.
Good stuff.
Excellent. If you want to get in contact with us and share your thoughts about the episodes, you can email us to feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com, or you can join us over on our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/tvpodcastindustries. You can also join us each week for our coverage of Marvel's What If, which comes out Wednesdays on Disney+. And we'll be back with Why the Last Man, episode 4, Karen and Benji, next week. I don't know who Karen and Benji are. I've never heard of those characters.
No, I don't. So I'm like, who?
So I guess 355 and Yorick will probably meet them in Boston, huh?
Yeah, it sounds like a post-apocalyptic new folk group that's been set up.
Well, yes, music is still required in the apocalypse.
It certainly is.
Though? Folk music, is it though?
Well, it feels like Sonny and Cher, but
Yes.
just Karen and Benji.
I like it. Thanks so much for joining us. Talk to you next time.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us, fellow survivors. It's great discussing this episode and, of course, the first 3 episodes that we've done back to back. Looking forward to episode 4. We hope you are too. Remember, keep watching, keep listening, and keep surviving. Bye.
But
Bye.